Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah Payton-Jones. I'm a moderator for Black Long Island, representing 30,000 Black Americans here on Long Island. We try to bring you topical information and interviews with individuals that we think you should know. Today is no different than that. Today, we are very honored to be able to introduce to some and bring it before others Valerie Cartright. Valerie Cartright is currently the councilwoman for District 1. District 1 on Long Island represents Stony Brook, Oldfield, Paquette. Now, I never say that absolutely 100% correct. So those of you who live there, please don't judge. Setauket, Belterre, Port Jefferson Station, and Terryville. I must say, driving out in those areas, it's quite a beautiful area to drive around. So if you've not ventured out, there's plenty of interesting things for you to see out there. So take a moment to enjoy Long Island. She has been described as a devoted, passionate, community-conscious advocate. She has platforms that run the gamut: social welfare, our environment, human rights, housing, under the moniker of social welfare, housing, healthcare, mental health, and oftentimes we don't think that substance abuse is under mental health or social welfare. Education, families, childhood, our seniors. Under our environment, water quality, effects of climate change, renewable energy, recycling solutions. Yes, solutions, not just recycling. There need to be solutions when we think about recycling. Then we go into human rights, racial equity, LGBTQ equality, immigrant rights, basic human rights, income equality, and criminal justice. Valerie Cartright comes to us with a very, very, very solid resume. She's an attorney, an educator, and an elected official, serving in her 4th term for all of you in District 1. But the thing about Valerie that I have found over the years in trying to get to know our political, all those with political might on Long Island, is that she's there for everyone. She will represent District 1 in Albany. She represents District 1 in every district on Long Island. Why? Because she's a supporter, she works hard, and what we found in just watching her work is that she gets along with everyone. And what does that mean? That means that she's willing to hear and understand that she was blessed with 2 ears and 1 mouth. So she's able to hear from both sides of the fence. And then we have to be reminded that we also have those that represent the Libertarian Party. We have those that represent the Green Party and the working families and the conservative parties. And so when you are able to hear the concerns of what's most important, your constituents, when you hear the concerns of all of your constituents, that is something that will then lend you to be the person in your community that they seek to re-elect. So today we're going to just have a casual, organic conversation and really pull out some more information that each of you may not know. But before we do that, we want to make sure you know that we are in the midst of early voting. Early voting started on June the 13th. June the 13th, and we have a full array, and we're going to have, at the end of this, you'll see the listing showing you the locations as well as the hours. Because in Suffolk County, every day that we are open, there are varied hours. So we want to make sure that you don't miss your opportunity. We want to also say that each of you who are registered to vote in New York should have by this time received an absentee application. The absentee application was to be filled out, mailed back in the self-stamped address envelope that was included, and then you were to be sent an absentee ballot. Please fill out that absentee ballot and submit it back in the mail. For those of you who want to continue to vote in person, again, early voting started on June 13th, and it runs through June 21st, leaving June 22nd as a day to recalibrate the machines and be open in polling locations on June the 23rd. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to your councilwoman, Valerie Cartright. Valerie, do you have an opening statement?
Thank you. Well, I'd like to say thank you for having me. This is an extremely important platform. I know how important it is to try to bridge that gap between the regular constituency who really doesn't spend a lot of time trying to learn about government and some of the things that government actually handles, because we're running our day, we're running our course, right? That's not something that people usually just stop and say, oh, let me do some research. Let me find out about what my local council person does or my county legislator. So I think that every opportunity that we get to be able to just have a conversation and talk about some of the things that I do, some of the things that various elected officials do, it starts to bridge that gap and makes people a little bit more interested in government, in politics. Because that's something that we as a people, and I say as a people, I'm not just talking about African Americans, but I say that too for our population, that we are not as active in voting and in the political process as we should be. Especially given the fact that, our ancestors, gave their lives, to make sure that we had this right. But I find it's all different classes, all different races of people who just decide sometimes they don't want to vote because they feel like their vote may not make a difference. So taking an opportunity to speak to someone like me, an elected official, for the past 7 years, I think is helpful to enlighten our community. So thank you. Thank you.
We thank you. We try to bring, we think it's important that people understand that one interview does not make the entire world. You're not speaking on behalf of every single council person that has run in the past. And that's what's really endearing about this and this opportunity, because we are stating, we never can say that we're voting for one person or another as an interviewer. I can never say that. I can always say that it is a nonpartisan opportunity to bring different points of view to the masses. So by saying and doing that, it gives us a wonderful opportunity to just delve in, like they said in the movie Shrek. We'll peel it back like it's an onion, because an onion has all these layers. And we found that you have a lot of layers as well. So how would you feel about working, or how have you felt about working in public office where you don't necessarily agree with all of the political opinions that are coming back and forth in the midst of a conversation? How do you handle that?
It's difficult. It's difficult every day, but it's something that we have to deal with. And we just have to find the best way to deal with it. You mentioned a moment ago that I get along with everyone. Just because I smile doesn't mean I get along with everyone. It comes down to some issues that are painted to be red and blue issues or partisan issues are not partisan. They affect our quality of life. They affect, me, just as it may affect someone who's Caucasian, just as it may affect someone else from a different background. It's important that we try to, I say, dumb it down, bring it to a point where people understand that, yes, I know that this has been politicized. However, let's take away the political component and let's talk about why it's important for us to have healthcare. I know that it has become divisive, and unfortunately, because of where we are in this time in our country, there's so much more divisiveness than I've ever seen. So it's black. It's like it's a black and white thing. It's either red and blue, and unfortunately, even in the red, it's either Trump or non-Trump, right? So there's division in our parties. There's division in our government, and if we want to move forward, we need to start bridging that gap. And the way you start to do it is to start talking about the issue itself and how that issue could effectively impact that person's family, that person's child. If you were in this situation, how would you feel? Would you want this to happen to you? And when they start to look at it from that perspective, they say, oh, actually, you might be right. And then you have created an opportunity for them to open their minds. And then you can kind of get past that blue-red line. I speak from experience because I am on a town board of 7 people. I'm the only Democrat of 7 elected officials. I am the first and only Black from the 1600s. Our town is the second largest in the state of New York. So we have approximately 500,000 residents. And the largest town is the town of Hempstead. In totality, so you understand, just looking at the state, we have 933 towns. We have a new town that came up about a year ago. We have 933 towns, so we're the second largest. So to have such lack of diversity in 2020 is problematic, and to have such lack of experience. Everyone has different personal experiences. Some of my colleagues have a lot of experience in the political world. Some come from the education background, but I grew up in Queens, so I grew up in a different world.
Yes.
A lot of the things that I experienced there, I bring to the table here.
Can I say this? I think that what you said earlier in answering the question, dumb it down. I think that's a wonderful way to look at it, because, and for our viewers, when she says dumb it down, she doesn't mean dumb it down for the people. It's dumb down the entire, what are we talking about? Let's take this and break it down. We're breaking it down to the simplest molecule so that we can see what our commonalities are. So what I have watched is that she can take a situation, and what do I say I watch? Because if I go to a lot of political activities throughout New York State and actually throughout the country. And in DC and in New York, you see that there's a whole different type of swag, a whole different type of politicking, so to say. But I found that in watching all of our elected officials at a variety of events, whether they are speaking or it's a social gathering, I see that you have the innate ability, or I've watched you have the innate ability to take the conversation to a level of commonality. Mm-hmm. Because once you can get people at a level of commonality, you can have a conversation, because you're speaking apples to apples. And I used apples because of New York, of course. Mm-hmm. But we're speaking apples to apples. So that is a true politician who wants to get things done, not just a political person who wants to be in office. So those are some of the things I want our constituents to think about. You want to make sure that when there's a conversation, that there is not a canned message. It's not just a patented canned message. You try to get to the base and then you work up from there. And that's something that's admirable in any politician. So I wanted to bring that out. I also wanted to say that in creating the opportunity, these are what your words, creating an opportunity, because that's what working in a nonpartisan manner means, that you're creating an opportunity to let all of the constituents be the ultimate winners. Because it's not about red or blue. It's about your constituents. So we're going to move to the next question, and we're going to ask you, this is a little reflection. So back in 2013 State of the Union speech, President Obama addressed climate change. And I saw that was one of the, in our environment, something that you're very, very passionate about. And so he addressed climate change and the need for us to be expedient. And in recent years, we've seen more once in a lifetime occurrences in the last 2 years than we have seen ever. So how do you see climate change, and what is your commitment to soften its impact on our state?
So being an elected official, part of the answer to that is making sure that local governments are also stepping in and making their own commitments. So the town of Brookhaven has actually taken the lead in making sure that our other local municipalities that surround us know that even though our governor may make a pledge, to reach a certain goal for renewable energy within a certain period of time, we can't just leave it up to him. We as local governments have our own authority and have our own power. So we started at home. What we do, we solar panels, creating electric charging stations at some of our town parks, making sure that we just recently, actually one of the first towns that involved ourselves in something called a community choice aggregate program, where we're creating energy and giving, not creating energy, but giving citizens an opportunity to purchase energy from a different place. So giving options, making sure that we are teaching from an education perspective, teaching about how you keep your environment clean. If you've paid attention to some of the things that happened from the county legislature recently, banning plastic bags, you know, straws, all of these things that are being done to help to protect our environment, because we are at a crucial state. You know, we have some of our highest elected officials saying that basically climate change is not real, and that's not the case. I mean, and you see the flooding, and you see the clear results of climate change, and we have to do our part as residents to fight back against that. So local municipalities need to be doing what they're supposed to do on a local level and taking the lead. The state needs to, once they make commitments, make sure that they pass certain legislation that supports those commitments, puts funding into educating certain communities. You know, some of our communities may not have an understanding of what environmental initiatives that they can involve themselves in that can help them be a part of the process. So education is key. And the way you educate is you have to pour money into that, right? You have to pour money into that initiative so we can make sure that it's getting into the right communities.
And you know, that's so true. And right now we're in the middle of, I call it the double pandemic, and money is going to be tight. Money is going to be tight. So the people that we send to state government are going to have to play nice in the sand, because the bottom line is there's not a lot to go around, and we want to make sure that we're doing the best for our constituents. And that led me to, one of your answers led me to this question. Congratulations on being the first African American to sit in government, in elected official in the town of Brookhaven. Congratulations to being the only person of your party that represents your party, and you've done it for 4 terms, so you must be doing something that is appealing to your other comrades, I'll call them. So in addition to that, as we look forward, what do you think, how can we increase African American employees in the state? What can we possibly do? We're in 2020 and we're still having all of these firsts that are happening. I know my daughter was the first African American lifeguard in our town. My husband was the first African American chief of rescue for the fire department. So, you know, there's still so many firsts, and we think that we've come so far, but what can we do to have more African Americans as employees within state government?
Well, when we deal with state government, we're dealing with civil service positions, or we're dealing with appointed positions, right? So when we deal with appointed positions, I look at my town board, for example. I look at town hall, to be quite honest. There are not many African Americans that walk around town hall. In the council seats, it's 7 of us, well, 6 of us, and then a supervisor. It's myself and my legislative aide, who I consider my chief of staff, who are the only African Americans. So those are appointed positions. So it was important to me that I created opportunities for people that look like me. So I made sure that I affirmatively said, I want to make sure that I have not only a woman, you know, but someone that is of African American descent, because we're lacking in this industry. Once you give that exposure, it opens a door. It says, oh, I think I like government. I may not want to run for office, but I might want to be the next department head of, you know, housing and human services. So it's exposure. I have interns that I bring in, and I try my best to bring in as many diverse interns as possible, because I understand how it's lacking. So civil service, you have to take an exam. Okay, so the Department of Civil Service needs to be doing training in our communities. Do you understand? So people will say to me, you know, I look at the government and it's white, everyone's white. And I said, well, take the exam. If you take the exam and you're able to place, that'll put you in a position. That's not the end-all answer, but the majority of positions are civil service. And if we're not telling our kids, if we're not telling our brothers that there are all of these civil service examinations that continuously throughout the year are available, and please take it, you know, then we put ourselves at a disadvantage and we don't even get through the door.
I think that is amazing because oftentimes people don't know the questions to ask because they don't know. So this is giving people an opportunity, that our viewers, a chance to hear how they can go about doing things. People may have seen other individuals in different jobs, not know how to even begin going about getting that job. So starting by having a civil service, taking the civil service exam is huge. And I think that that is something that is a takeaway for one of today's takeaways. I want to move a little bit. You know, I have these questions and I have like a canned group of questions I ask individuals, but I tend to like to flow with what how the conversation is going. So we know that you are an attorney, and from what I've read, a very successful attorney, and an attorney that was compassionate and understood what they were fighting for and who they were fighting for. So then you went on to become an educator, and then an elected official. So you're like, I'll call it like the three branches of government. You know, you have an understanding so that you can bring a humanistic approach. You can bring a solid-based, law-based approach. And then you could teach people how to understand that entire process, because 99% of the people are lay people. So with that all being said, what experience has prepared you to become a state senator?
So wearing a lot of hats, I bring, as you indicated, a lot of experience. As a state senator, you're legislating, right? You're legislating, but you also have to understand the law. You need to, for example, bail reform was one of the things that most recently became controversial. And I found myself a lot going back and forth with some of my colleagues about the actual constitutionality of certain things and what the criminal justice system was actually meant for. Because of my background, I was able to bring that to the table. I'm going to use another example, the example related to police reform. You know, we just most recently passed the most aggressive package of legislation in the state of New York, and that occurred. This is not new. The civil rights activists, civil rights lawyers, social justice groups have been pushing for this for decades, and it happened within a week's time. And that was because we collectively stood up and said, and it wasn't just us, we had those that don't look like us sitting in solidarity saying, we are going to make a change right now. So when I look at that, I was able to, when I was talking to my colleagues and talking to people who may not have necessarily agreed with some of the legislation that was being passed, I was able to use my experience and, for example, say, I have clients that till this day, 9 years later, when their daughter passed away, still has not seen that hundreds of pages of an internal affairs report. Like, you would want to have a certain level of closure if you lose a member of your family. And certain information should be public, not your address. We're not talking about all the personal information. We're talking about complaints that are brought against you. We're talking about if in fact there was an internal affairs report that, you know, that you were a part of that rendered a 500 or 600 or 700 page report, that should be disclosed to the public. These are public servants that protect us. We pay for them just as you guys pay for my salary.
That's so true. And you know, when we're looking at civil servants and we're looking at people who are out there assigned to protect and to serve, we think of policemen, firemen, teachers. You know, we think of those individuals, and everyone is held accountable because everyone has somebody else's something, their life, their mind, their compassion, their empathy in their hands. And so we do lord over many people in those different jobs. So that takes me, and that makes me also think, you know, a lot of people learn from what's going on in society, different words. And so I think that our population, our viewing population may have learned about redact or to redact information, because in the last 4 years or so, there's been a lot of paperwork that has been released, and the word redact. So when you were stating that there's ways that we can then do these, release this information, and we just need to redact the information that need not be public.
Right.
So so as our viewing audience is listening, so there are ways, so we're never ever intending, no one's ever intending to give a personal address or a name or a birthday or anything that would then lead someone that has unscrupulous intent to come and do harm to anyone. You know, it's not like that ever. You know, it's never good to think negatively. You know, there's only one person in my mind that can really lord over all of that, and each one of us knows who that is in our own lives. So whenever we're thinking of giving information out, we can redact information, and that just means that we just omit that which is not important for the story. It's just like your good cousin that omits part of the story when they're telling you a story. You have to know that sometimes we do that on purpose. So for those of you who don't know what a state senator is, I did a little research, and yes, our councilwoman gave you the parameters of what a senator is, but I wanted to just give you like the Webster's version, so you'll have a little bit. A state senator, as a state senator, you're a member of the legislative branch, just like if you're a U.S. senator. You're elected by voters to represent them in the Senate, where your primary duties are creating, debating, and voting on legislation that either makes new laws or modifies the existing ones. The New York State Senate is the upper house of the New York State Legislature. Its 63 members represent New York State and its more than 19 million citizens. The legislator's primary purpose is to draft, approve changes to laws of New York. So just as was just stated, in the last week, there have been monumental reform that has been passed and signed by the governor. So it's one thing to pass something, another thing to get it signed. First, it's one thing to draft it. Then after you draft it, then you have to then debate it. Then after you debate it, you have to then get all those people on your side to at least to understand where you're coming from. You don't have to agree with me to understand where I'm coming from. At least that'll give us a holistic conversation so that we both can make a decision based upon intel and intelligent intel. There are 63 senators in New York State, 2 conferences, 37 standing committees, and since 1776, we have had 238 different sessions of our Senate, for our senators. So as we stated earlier, Valerie Cartright is running, and there are 4 other individuals that are running to gain the Democratic bid to be able to represent the winner of the 2 Republican candidates that are running in a separate primary. And so we've already said some of that which is important with what your experience was, but you touched upon, that's why I love to base it upon what an individual has already said. What is your position on the new bail reform laws, and what do you think are the benefits or the downfalls in your opinion?
I'm going to put it in terms of both the bail reform and police reform.
Okay.
We have a system that is supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. We have a bail system which was to ensure that you are returning to court. Okay, that was what the purpose of it was. We started to talk about dangerousness. All of these things started becoming part of the conversation when that wasn't what our system was intended for. And the education component of this piece of legislation, the bail reform, was lacking. You know, we unfortunately weren't out in the community teaching that these are the components of it. This is what it's supposed to do, because I think that that would have been able to stop some of the negative narrative that was played around it. In 2005, there was a report done in Suffolk County related to our Suffolk County jail system. And at that time, I believe there were about 53% of the inmates at the time were being held pre-trial. Okay, so they were being held, and 20% of those were being held under $1,000 bail. So think about that. Because you are not economically advantaged, you are now told for possibly, and I'm just putting anything out there, petty larceny or something, you're told that now I'm going to give you $1,000 bail. You can't afford it. You are the sole breadwinner in the home. So now you are stuck in jail. You lose your job. It's a trickle-down effect. Families become destroyed as a result of the fact that they cannot come out of the system, meaning they're in because they were accused. They might be guilty or they might be innocent, but there's a system that has to play itself out. It's difficult to play itself out when you're behind bars and you can't afford to raise money or make money to be able to pay an attorney. There's so many different components to it. And I think that the education component was lacking. Bail reform was long overdue. Police reform was long overdue. And yes, as legislators, whether you're on a town level, a county level, or a state level, you should always be looking at the laws and saying, how can we do better? Sometimes there are unintended consequences to the laws that you pass, but you learn about those unintended consequences by doing a study, by listening to the constituents, not one-sided, from everyone. Okay, this might have been a problem, so we might need to fix this. And then let's hear from more constituents. And oh, this was good. We need to continue to keep this. That was not what was happening. And we need to, when you asked me earlier about what else I bring to the table, working with others and being able to educate others on pieces of legislation, on things happening in our community. Being an educator, teaching at St. Joseph's College, I have the ability to be able to kind of lay it out for you so you understand beforehand. What I've done in my district, I've created extra levels of transparency, extra levels of communication, where the law may only require one public hearing on an issue. But if I know it's going to be controversial, I'm having all these separate meetings. I've gone to my constituents' home to go talk to them and show them, because I think it's important that people have a part in the process. We're not always going to agree. Most of the time we don't, but we have to somewhere meet in the middle most of the time.
I think that I saw your passion coming through as you were talking, and the next thing, one is a statement. I want people to know that you're a mother. You are a survivor.
I am.
You are a wife. You are a constituent. So when you're fighting for all of those things. You're not just fighting for one ilk, you're fighting for everyone. And you represent so many different facets of what a constituent is. And so I just want, oftentimes you don't know the history of a person that's running. You don't have an idea of, what endears them or what could possibly endear them. So I think I just wanted to say that because, I felt and saw your passion coming through in the answer to that question. And I just wanted to say that, and congratulations to that.
Thank you. Do you want me to share a little bit about my personals, about who I am as Valerie?
I think that people see us in a work mode and don't realize that right before we get it on screen, we're wiping a nose, we're putting a Band-Aid on over here, we're talking to a constituent and talking them into doing something that they would love to do but never thought they had the ability to do. So give us a little insight into who is Valerie. You told us a little bit. You told us that you were, a Queens girl and moved to Long Island and came in and said, like, a whole new world. This is like amazing. And this is where I'm going to put my roots. I'm going to live here, and I want to be a part of the fabric of Long Island. So give us a little bit.
Okay, so I am the daughter of Haitian immigrants. I'm first generation Haitian American. I am the only girl of 3. So I have 2 siblings, which are brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. I grew up in Queens. My dad taught me about how important service was very early on. As an immigrant, he served in Vietnam. And always taught us how important it is to give back to your country, even if it's not your native country. I went to West Virginia University. So it was culture shock.
Culture.
Of 22,000 people at the time, there were less than 1,000 what people consider minorities. So it wasn't just Blacks, but minorities. I came out from West Virginia University, a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. I know that you're part of the Divine Nine, so I want to just make sure I make that clear.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Different colors, but same principles. Like, I know. I'm wearing the other colors today, but yeah. It's Black though, not blue. I went to school on Long Island. I went to Touro Law School, and it was around that time, 2003, that I started moving out to Long Island. Queens is part of Long Island, but nobody, but
yeah, there's no water between us. There's no
to Nassau, Suffolk, and I was practicing law. Certain areas of law, and went into criminal defense, and then went into civil rights work, and found myself working with Fred Burrington for almost 8 years as one of his senior attorneys. That's where I did a lot of my work with respect to police brutality, excessive force, things of that nature. Unfortunately, at times having to sue municipalities because of violations, but also a lot of employment discrimination, protecting women, protecting those that are discriminated against because of their gender, their sex, their religion. And was practicing, purchased my home because it's so difficult to find affordable housing. Purchased my home with my girlfriend because that was the only way we can get that first house, and in Port Jefferson Station. And was comfortable living here, diagnosed with breast cancer at an early age, 32. When it was shocked, turned everything up, in my world, in a situation where I had to have both of my breasts removed. So I went through that treatment. God is good. I believe in God. God is good. I was able to still have children and a daughter who's 3.5-year-old. I got married 5 years ago. I have a 3.5-year-old, something like that, right? Don't tell them I'm messing up the days.
We won't say. We won't tell.
But that's my life. And I've been in a lot of scenarios where I'm the only Black person in the room. West Virginia University. Touro was a lot more diverse. And then coming to Port Jeff Station, it wasn't the most welcoming experience from everyone, but those that did welcome me really made the difference.
Yes.
And this is where I am, and I found myself in government because someone asked me to run.
And see, that's why it's important to have conversations like this, because everyone's journey is different. Some were asked, some were called, because you were called. It's just like when you think about church, they say you were called, you just don't walk up and say, I'm going to be pastor. Sometimes you have to be called. And so you were called into politics because someone saw in you the forward trajectory to helping others, and how you could take others and bring them along with you and not just leave them. So you're bringing everyone that's ever voted with you is with you every time you're making a decision. I'm sure that that's what drives you, because the letters that you get, the calls that you get, the thank yous you get, the thank list nights that are there as well. But because of what has come out of it, it enables you to be a public servant. And that's what people need to understand, that you're always, no matter what, whether you're a state employee or if you're an elected official, you're serving the public, because the public, whether it was through taxes or voting, got you to the point that you are, not just you, but anyone in those positions. So that being said, looking at the state Senate, I'm sure, oftentimes we don't think about what we would then do, but what your passions are. So what two committees on the Senate would you want to then work on and bring your wealth of talents to the Senate? Of course, if elected, what two committees can you see yourself working on?
That is a very difficult question because I have gone through them over and over again, and I'm like, well, there's so many committees that I want to be on. What I can say is healthcare is important to me. Even though my background doesn't come from the health industry, I do understand how important it is to all of us. And I think that there need to be strong voices on that committee, making sure that we have affordable, accessible, and quality healthcare for all. So healthcare is one of the many committees that I would be interested in, and also education. Education is, you know, it's the key to our success. It intersects with everything we talk about, and we need to start. And I'm using the governor's terms where he says reimagine education, but we need to do it with our teachers and our educators. And so that is another committee that I am interested in as well. But I will find myself, I'm sure, as I always do, overextending myself and being on a whole lot of committees because there's so much work to be done.
I'll say that when we think of what's happening I briefly, today is June 15th, 2020. And when I made reference earlier of the two pandemics, of course, one, and this is something because this tape will live forever. Now digital lives forever. Mm-hmm. To put it in context, the first pandemic started in March. I haven't been back to my office in New York City since March the 12th. And that was the COVID-19 virus or coronavirus that has been labeled. And so that was one thing that we have been here in New York. We have been under what we call quarantine, and we have our governor has created phases so that if different municipalities meet certain phases, that they're able to move on to begin to open. We wear masks, so I'm saying that's why we don't have our masks here, because we are all in our individual homes safe to make sure that we're not spreading the coronavirus, and we want to make sure that the decline and the downward trajectory that we're on now to help eradicate this horrible, horrible, horrible disease from where we are all doing our very best. So that's why we are operating from this standpoint. The other pandemic is a pandemic of systemic racism that reared its ugly head again on Memorial Weekend when George Floyd was unceremonially murdered by a sitting police officer who no longer works for the police department in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so we would have been remiss not to make reference to this as though nothing is going on around us. In addition to that, there has been so much that's come out of this. The terms that people are now using as common day terms are microaggression and passive aggressive and angry Black woman syndrome, or, you know, she's aggressive, you know, so just because she speaks out of her mouth, not that she spoke anything loudly or anything, she just speaks. So that means she's passive aggressive, or she's overly aggressive, or she's an angry Black woman. So we just want everyone to know that all of those statements are so far from reality that it's just absurd that they have been said as murmurs underlying and undergirding individuals for years and years and years. So I wanted to make sure that you saw Valerie as a woman, period. A woman who has succeeded, a woman who has sought education, a woman who has birthed a child, a survivor. We give our survivors of breast cancer so many kudos. Let's not look at her any differently. Our politicians, we want them to be strong, but do we want our women politicians to be strong? So you have to make sure that when you're putting together and piecing together what makes you vote for an individual, you make sure that you are creating an opportunity, that you're looking at the issues. What does that mean? You're looking at the person and making a decision, or you're looking at what that person has done and making a decision. Again, we can't tell you who to vote for. We don't want to ever try to do that. We want to make sure, one, that you're registered, because just like Lotto, if you're not in it, you can't win it. And you can't complain if you don't vote. So there's so many different things you need to be mindful of. So with that being said, I have one more question for you, and then we're going to be within our time frame, but we would ask, before we give you that last question, if you would be open to coming back and talking to us again and letting the people of Black Long Island and anyone else who sees this know what else is going on with Valerie Cartright.
Absolutely. I make myself available whenever asked. I think one of the best things that we've done as a community on Long Island is create this Black Long Island. With technology, we have to learn how to connect in different ways, and you guys are accomplishing that. So absolutely, invite me and I'll be there.
Thank you so much for that. We will make sure that the founders, Billy and Felicia Morse of Black Long Island, and all of the moderators that represent and keep Black Long Island going strong know your sentiments. The last question I have for you is, in a perfect world, what would you hope to accomplish in your first 100 days in office?
Healthcare, address the healthcare concerns that have been highlighted throughout this COVID pandemic, concerns that have existed for, decades, and we are now actually shining a light on that. Continue to push forth reform with respect to our criminal justice system and our police reform system. We need to make sure that there's accountability and transparency. We don't want it to be us against them. We want, community policing. We want to be, in communication in line with police officers, but there is systemic, institutionalized racism within that system, as well as all the other systems. So find ways to be able to break through all of those systems. Also, bring on a more diverse legislature. Won't happen in the first 100 days, but empower others that look like me to say, wow, I can do this. I can run for office. I can not only run for local office, I can run for state senate. Guess what? If I want to run for Congress, I can do that as well. That we need to empower our youth, and you've worked with me on that before, Deborah, but we need to empower our young people and let them know that they can do anything that they want, and that there are people that have paved the way, but we have to make sure we're reaching back and pulling them up with us.
We, on behalf of Black Long Island and all of your constituents that we hope to reach, we hope that you know that we are so happy that God saw fit to keep you so that you can have the opportunity to discuss what is relevant and bring it to the forefront so that other people can at least come together and have an understanding so that proper communication can prevail for all of your constituents. So we also would like to say thank you for just being open, being able to have a conversation without and to the audience, she did not know the questions that we were going to ask. Whenever we do this, whenever I moderate this, I try to say it's going to be a organic conversation, no hidden agendas, and no opportunity for us to blindside. It's never the intent to blindside. We want to enhance, we want to unify, we want to make sure that everyone knows that when you are looking to do these things, that you're a human being as well, and you may be inspired to run yourself. Whether it's for the school board, the PTA, you may want to run for your union board at work. Run for something, stand for something. You'll find out that your voice really does matter. We thank you so much, and we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you.
The one and only Valerie Cartright.
Thank you. I'm Valerie Cartright, Councilwoman in the town of Brookhaven. I'm also an educator and an attorney, and I am asking for your vote on June 23rd. I believe in affordable, accessible, and quality healthcare. I believe in education reform, and I believe in true justice. Hopefully I can count on you on June 23rd to help me be the next New York State Senator, Senate District 1.